And so what is different from this? Where does this change? What is the moment before this that enabled all this kinds of prosperity? Prosperity that GE enjoyed. Prosperity that allowed these industrial corporations to become so powerful and so wealthy. Well, it wasn't just accident. It was policy. It was a decision made by the government. Now, I'm going to step back for a second, back to the 1930s. So in the 1930s, we're very familiar as historians writing about the FHA. We talk about the FHA in terms of the way that it ensured private capital and promoted its investment in suburbia. And this was a good thing. People living in tenements needed better housing, no matter what we might think about suburbia today. At the time, there was an incredible housing crisis in America. But houses aren't enough. They're not factories. They don't produce value. What really transformed the economy in a lot of ways was going into World War II. Now, this is the point where if you guys were undergraduates, one of you would raise your hand and say, I know what it is, Professor Hyman. The war made it possible. The war stopped the Great Depression. I'd say, yeah, in the sense that it's not exactly right. Okay, so let's talk about the actual policies which historians are less familiar with, have written much less about, things like the Defense Plant Corporation, which was a quasi-governmental corporation, just like Fannie Mae, first known as FNMA, the Federal National Mortgage Association. But it had the same kinds of policies, successful, squarely New Deal policies that worked in collaboration between business, big business. It was run by the guys from Sears Roebuck. It was run by the largest people, the industrial corporations, and government, working together to figure out where to invest all that capital that sat idle in the American banks. If you go back and you read the letters between the head of banks like the forerunner of today's Citibank, the National City Bank, and Bank of America, you can see in their letters the anxiety about where they will put their money. It's hard for us to understand as normal people, this anxiety. Well, how could you run out of investment opportunities? How could you run out of places to put your money profitably and securely? Yet this is the primary anxiety of the Great Depression, a supply anxiety of over-capital, where to put it. And it's in actions like the FHA, which we know a lot about, that they began to relieve that anxiety through policies that reduced the risk of investment, through policies that promoted investment. But things like this, the Defense Plant Corporation, we've forgotten. Now, what this did was channel private investment, make it easy to invest in crazy new technologies like aerospace. Aerospace would be like, let's invest in a space elevator right now. Crazy stuff, right? I mean, there were a few airplane companies, there were a few airfields, but it was really at the margins of the economy. With the Defense Plant Corporation and the war funding all those plants, in just the space of a few years, they create an industry that's 4 times larger than the pre-war auto industry. And at the end of the war, they drop a transportation infrastructure onto America, 1,000 airfields that enables this kind of network effect to happen all at once. And at the same time, the Defense Plant Corporation launches us into new directions in basic materials like aluminum, which in the 19th century was used to gild rich people's homes. Now is so cheap we put it by the side of the roads. It's these kinds of transformations that, to me, I think make for a very usable past, a usable past for understanding about how to manipulate the flow of capital to produce a more equitable economy. I think even labor historians would agree that working in aerospace in the post-war was a good deal. This is the foundation of that post-war prosperity, these new kinds of industries. It restarted capitalism. And it wasn't just through government demand. It was through government intervention to reshape supply of capital. And yet, this story of this is forgotten. It's in a book that very few of us have read, except for big history of capitalism nerds. And it is something that was forgotten because it worked so well. It was forgotten because it worked so well. Within a few years, all the things that the DPC did were just passed off to private industry at a profit for the government and allowed to flourish, whereas the FHA was an ongoing endeavor.